Hello, 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 everybody, and happy Tuesday. I hope everybody had a great weekend, and thank you so much for tuning in for another fantastic episode of Let's Talk About Shh. For anybody joining us for the very first time, this, of course, is a live broadcast where we talk about love, intimacy, relationships, and everything connected to that. So, who am I? My name is Tila. I'm a sex educator, relationship expert, and published author. I am super passionate about talking about sex ed. I love helping people connect with that part of themselves. So often in society, there is not enough conversation about intimacy and relationships and sex, and it leaves people floundering. We are here to close the gap and to close that information gap. Sex is fun. Why shouldn't learning about it be? All right, so this is, as I mentioned, a live broadcast, which means your comments will show up in the video feed. And we actually have a phone line where people are welcome to call in with their thoughts, questions, comments, or advice or need for advice. So just keeping in mind that we want to keep a nice, safe environment for everybody. We want people to feel safe asking questions. As a sex educator, you would not believe some of the questions I've heard. Lots of people are misinformed. There's tons of misinformation out there in various areas of the world, and nobody should be embarrassed about asking questions and getting answers, okay? So if somebody comes on, whether it's through the chat or maybe they call in and, you're like, oh my God, how do they not know that? Or, oh my God, what are they talking about? Please be supportive. We want to make sure that people can get their questions answered, okay? So open up the phone lines now. If you want to call in with a question, comment, or concern, or anything like that, the number, of course, is toll free at 1-877-777-5589. So how is everybody doing today? Let's just make sure all of our feeds are up. Looks like we are up, and that's fantastic. Okay. Hope everybody's doing well. Today I thought we would talk about having the talk. Now, what talk is that? Well, the sex talk, of course. In my career as a sex educator, I actually get approached by a lot of parents who don't know how to navigate talking to their kids about sex. And unfortunately, this is a huge gap. There is some resources out there. I love, on Instagram, I love following Sex Positive Parenting. They post some really fantastic tips. But there's books and everything out there, but a lot of parents are left floundering. They don't know where to turn. They don't know how to talk to their kids about sex. They don't know how to ask about how to talk to their kids about sex. So I thought that this would be a good episode so that we can talk about some of those issues. I know it's not exactly the sex tips or cutting edge issues that, we've talked about in previous episodes, but it is also equally important. So, as I mentioned, lots of parents are terrified. They don't know the best way. They don't know how to broach certain subjects, and they don't know how or when they can bring it up. And, if talking about sex is embarrassing for you, which it is for a lot of people, so you're definitely not alone in that regard. When you're trying to talk to a kid about it, it's even worse because now you're taking this taboo subject that you're nervous about and you're applying it into a situation that society tells us is not okay. Society tells us very strongly that kids should be shielded from all sexual content and that we should never talk about sex. They should never see sex. They should never see sexual content at all. And a lot of this stems from our desire to protect children and to protect their innocence. And one of the problems with that is that when we don't talk to kids about sex, we're actually leaving them in a vulnerable place because we're making them right for sexual predators. So in our attempts to protect children, we're actually exposing children to greater risk. Children who are not aware about sexuality or sex or intimacy or what's appropriate and what's not appropriate are more likely to be confused by an adult predator in their life that takes advantage of that. Kids that have a solid basis of understanding for whatever age they're at are more likely to tell a parent or adult in their life if something inappropriate has happened, they're also more likely to stand up for themselves and set firm boundaries. Kids are in a very vulnerable place when it comes to sexuality because they're shielded, and also because as a kid, you rely on the adults around you to tell you what's appropriate, right? So if a child it has never been talked to about sex or sexuality, and a predator is telling them that this is okay, whatever is happening, then unfortunately the kid is going to, one, feel extremely confused and conflicted, but they're also probably just going to go along with it and not tell anybody because, well, an adult said it was okay. And they have no other basis for understanding what the appropriate boundaries are, if that makes sense. So it's an important conversation that people should be having with their kids or your nieces or nephews or anything like, family members, or if you're a grandparent or, a single parent or whatever your family situation is, if there are kids in your life that are relying on you to teach them stuff, this is an important conversation that you should be having with them. And so I thought we would dive into a little bit of tips of how to navigate some of these troublesome spots. And I kind of want to start with that embarrassment piece, because tone and presentation make a big difference. Kids, if they see that you are anxious and upset and uncomfortable talking about this topic, they're going to think that this topic is anxious, upsetting, and uncomfortable, and they're going to respond accordingly. So in some senses, we're teaching kids to be uncomfortable with talking about sex. And we're also teaching them that we're not okay, like we're not an okay adult to approach. If the conversation is really awkward and uncomfortable, when that kid gets older, or maybe they're a teen, that teen is not going to approach you with a question or with a trouble spot that they're having. If they get into trouble, they're not going to come talk to you about it. Why? Because that conversation was so uncomfortable, and that's what's going to stick with them, right? So addressing our own discomfort with the topic is really key, because even if we're starting to have these conversations with kids at younger ages, once again, the kid's going to pick up on whether or not you're uncomfortable. They just may not know why you're uncomfortable, but they're going to pick up on that discomfort. So one thing, is to do a little bit of work, figure out what is causing you to be uncomfortable talking about it. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of different reasons why people are uncomfortable talking about sex. Everything from a challenging topic to, maybe a troubled personal history to maybe that's just all that was modeled to you, was that it was really uncomfortable to talk about. So now it feels awkward because you haven't had the chance to practice those conversations. So one of the first steps is, sort of figuring out which is it for you. What is the source of your discomfort? Because then you can take steps to sort of mitigate that, make it more comfortable. If it's just a lack of familiarity, take some more time to learn about sex, learn about, read some books, check out some of these live podcasts, or other podcasts. There's so much information out there. Read some articles, get comfortable with the topic. And then if you're still feeling like, oh, I don't know what to say, or I trip over my words, I know what I want to say, but I get really anxious talking about it, rehearse with a friend, talk to your friend, talk to your co-parent, talk to your parent. I know some people are like, whoa, that's so awkward. Yeah, imagine, if you can talk to your parents about something that was previously uncomfortable, talking to your kid is going to be like so easy, so easy. So, take the steps to unpack that discomfort, okay? Because it's going to make things a lot easier down the road. So you've taken the time to take care of that for yourself. Now, the next important thing is to just sort of create that safe space for your kids to talk to you. So creating that safe space is all about making the moment not diffused with tension, which is, like I said, why it's so important that you're passingly comfortable with the topic. If you can't quite get there, there's no harm in saying, talking about this makes me a little uncomfortable. Because you want your kids to know that it's the topic and not them making you uncomfortable, which is an important distinction because once again, kids, depending on what age they're at, may not fully understand all the nuances of a situation. So it's important to just be clear. And there's no harm in saying, you know what, I don't really know much about this. How about we learn together? And that can be a way you can go to. So try and create some safe space. One of the ways you can do this is, and one of the best recommendations I have for parents is, do not try and cram the talk into one single time. Like a lot of people call it, like, that's why, this episode is called The Talk, because a lot of parents, they have the sex talk and like, then that's it, we're done, we're over it, we've had this talk and now it's over and it never needs to happen again. That is one of the biggest mistakes you can make with kids, because first of all, there's no possible way, that you're going to cover everything that they could potentially want to know about in one conversation. It would go on forever and you would be overloading them with information. They're not going to retain information. They're going to get bored. They're going to get shifty. They're going to want to move on. They're going to want to end the conversation. Like, there's just no way that you're going to get it all into a single conversation anyway. So please do not try. It's much easier to break the conversation up. And a lot of parents are like, well, I don't know how to do that. And how do I kind of make it casual? And how do I broach the subject? Well, you do it based on their interest and their level. And a lot of parents will ask, it's really common for parents to ask, well, I don't know when should I start showing, or when should I start talking or start worrying about this conversation with my kids? And the reality is you should worry about it when they show some interest. So this could be something innocent, it could be something as simple as, I saw this commercial on TV and I didn't really understand what it meant. And then you could talk about the sexual innuendo in this commercial. Or it could be, the dreaded question that most parents fear, like, what is a vagina, or what is a penis? A lot of the times kids at really young ages in particular, when they're asking those kind of questions, it's usually because they heard the word somewhere, or they heard something that made them kind of curious and they just kind of want to know what it is. You don't have to go into crazy depth, okay? A good baseline for sort of getting a feel for where your kid is at developmentally and how detailed of an answer you need to give is, you can say something like, well, what makes you ask? Or what do you think that is? And based on how they answer that, that's going to give you an understanding, like, oh, I heard this word on TV, or, oh, I heard some girls giggling about it, or, whatever context they have for the situation, or, and that will help you sort of answer how in depth they want to go. And then you can sort of start with like broader and simpler answers. You don't need to go into like excruciating detail. And you basically just kind of keep talking until your kid sort of, their interest wanders. Most parents are pretty good at telling when their kid is no longer interested in what they're saying or no longer interested in the conversation. And, if you give that, if you give a basic answer and they still seem sort of interested, you can just ask a follow-up question. Did that answer your question? What else are you wondering about? And stick with those nice open-ended questions because it invites conversation. And that way your kid can feel comfortable sort of opening up about it. Now, if they decide that that answer was sufficient, it's always a good idea to end those little snippet conversations by, saying things like, oh, well, I'm really glad you asked. If you have any of the other questions, I'd be happy, I'm here for you, or I'd be happy to answer them for you, right? So it's important to sort of end the conversations with, let your kids know that they can come back, because they're gonna have more questions. People have more questions. And you want them to come back to you. As uncomfortable as it may be, you want them to come back to you, because if they don't come back to you, they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to look for those answers somewhere else. And where they find those answers may not be the place you want them to. A lot of teens learn about sex through porn and teen magazines. Both are entertaining, both have their place, but sex education is not the goal. Okay, there's a lot of things that are shown or talked about in porn or teen magazines that leaves a lot out. Okay, and they're not getting a full picture of, sexuality or this particular experience. It's very slanted because it's in the view of entertainment. So, you want to be the resource that your kid comes back to, as uncomfortable as it could be for you. Do you really want them to go somewhere else to get that information? How are we feeling about that? Everybody with me so far? You guys still with me? Looks like it. All right, we'll keep on. I know it's I always give you guys so much information. It's a lot to process. So that's cool. We'll just keep on going back. And, if you feel that everything I'm giving you is a little overwhelming now, it's cool. You can always catch the replay or download the episode, re-listen to some of this, and let it sink in. And if you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to send me an email or shoot me a social media message, and we can explore it a little bit further. So, continuing on. If a lot of parents struggle with something where their kids are not really willing to open up, and they're not really, whenever they try to broach the subject of sex, it's ew, oh God, no, I can't talk to you about that, which can be frustrating. But it's important, if you're experiencing that with your child, just know it's a phase. Just hang in there. Kids get the same sort of messaging about talking to their parents about sex that parents get, where it's ew, that's disgusting, ew, that's uncomfortable, oh God, we shouldn't be talking about this, this is going to be the most awkward moment ever. So they're as susceptible to that societal messaging as parents are. And in some cases, based on where they are in their, life, whether they're a teen or particularly teens or preteens, they're already talking to their friends in most cases about sex. And so there's that extra peer pressure of oh God, you talk to your parents about that? That's so awkward. So, don't be discouraged by that. Just remain open, let them know that it's open. Don't force the conversation. You don't have to force the conversation, but if they're super resistant, you're really worried about it, you can always ask them why they're not, or don't say why, but what makes this uncomfortable for you? What can we do to make this conversation easier? And sort of encourage them to open up about it. And if they're still not doing it, there's always hey, I got you some books. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. But just hang in there. It's a phase that they're probably going through. Most kids grow out of it, and when they do have questions, if you have been open, they will approach you. So just hang in there. I know it can be super frustrating. It's really important that we take the time to build this safe space. Kids really need that sex ed. It's research has actually shown that kids that get good sex education are significantly more likely to delay their first sexual experience, as well as make smarter choices. So they're less likely to experience an unwanted pregnancy or contract an STI. They usually make smarter relationship decisions. So it's really important that this conversation is had and that you're that resource for your child. It's important. The other thing I was going to say about this as well is that I know a lot of parents think that they got this. I have run into a lot of parents who think that they've got this handled, Like, oh yeah, my kid knows they can come talk to me. It's cool. I don't need to do anything here. They know they can come talk to me. Research has actually also shown that like 90% of parents feel that they're open and approachable for their teens to talk about sex. And research has also shown that only about, 74% of teens would agree. So that's quite a, I mean, that does sound like a large number, but that also means on the flip side, that there's like 26% of teens that feel that they can't approach an adult in their life and that they have no resources to turn to. And just because a parent seems open and approachable doesn't necessarily mean that a teen will approach, particularly if they're hitting a trouble spot. So part of breaking up the conversation into multiple like bite-sized chunks is not only to ensure that, you're setting your child up for success in terms of intimacy and relationships and keeping that conversation open, but it's also establishing trust, right? It's establishing trust that they can trust you with this intimate stuff that society deems is much too uncomfortable to talk about. And one thing that is important to keep in mind is as kids get older, enter their teen years and start entering the dating world and stuff, they're going to come into contact with a lot of stuff that is brought on by peer pressure, that is, sort of part of raging hormones. And they're not always going to make smart choices. So a key tip to keeping that communication open is setting up something with your kid so that if they hit trouble, that they can talk to you about it. During the rebellious phase of teenagers, when they're struggling to find their identity and stuff, they're going to be breaking rules. You're going to be butting heads with them a lot. It happens. But how you respond to those situations can be key in whether or not your teen reaches out to you if they're really in trouble. Like, say, for example, you have a teen who's like, hey, I'm going to a sleepover at a friend's house, and they actually go out to a party. And what if, when they go to that party, they encounter a situation that, they're feeling pressured, pressured into intimacy, or maybe pressured into drugs or drinking or something like that. And they want to make a smart choice, but they don't feel like they have an out of the situation. Like maybe their ride wasn't there, or maybe they can't get a ride home, or maybe they don't know how to leave. Having something set up with your kids so that they feel comfortable reaching out to you so that they can make those smart choices, right? We have to sort of keep in mind that, people make mistakes. Teens are going to make mistakes. Yeah, they probably should have just gone to the sleepover at their friend's house and not snuck out to this party that they didn't tell you about. However, if you focus on the fact that they snuck out to this party, and that's what you're going to be mad about, then they're not going to call you, right? They're not going to call you to come get them. They're not going to call you for help to get out of this situation that has now made them uncomfortable. This is a number one way that a lot of kids end up slipping into drug use or in many cases sexual assault, because they find themselves in this situation. They think to themselves, oh my God, I can't call my mom or dad or aunt or grandparent or whoever my caregiver is because they're going to be so mad that I'm here in the first place. And then they end up in a worse situation. Some great advice that I've seen floating around, and huge advocate of it, is set up some sort of safety net with your kid in terms of like, I've heard people talk about like a text code word, that their kid can discreetly text. And when the caregiver receives that text, they call and pretend to be really mad. And, oh, you need to come home right now. You need to come home right now. And then the teen has a nice face-saving way to exit a situation they did not want to be in. The teen is able to say to their friends and not lose face, oh my God, my mom found out where I was. she's so mad, or my dad is so mad, I have to go, I gotta bounce, because their peers are going to understand that parental pressure, but it gives them a way to get out of the situation. Okay, now the key is that your kid is never going to use this if you're going to have a humongous big angry reaction and ground them. They're never going to use it. So I'm not saying don't get mad, I'm not saying don't discipline, but you have to be careful and strategic about how you're going to handle that situation, because it is going to be the difference as to whether or not they call you and whether or not they come to you for help in situations that you really, really want them to. Does that make sense? How are we doing? Everybody still with me? Does anybody want to share any tips that they have for this sort of situation? You know, helping their teen feel safe about opening up to them about tricky situations. No, nobody has any tips they want to share? Okay. Well, if you think of one, please feel free to comment or call in with it. I'd love to hear what other tips other parents have that is effective. And last thing I sort of want to say about the importance of starting, you know, the whole conversation about sex early and keeping it open and preferably sex positive is because I'm sure you probably remember from going through puberty. Puberty is a very confusing time. There's a lot happening in terms of hormones and a lot of things is that we don't really explain to kids what puberty is. I mean, oh yeah, we sort of talk about it in vague and abstract ways, but we don't really talk about the emotional impacts of puberty very often. And because adults have lived through puberty and they know things get better and they've experienced things getting better, it's common for a lot of adults to be very dismissive of teen moods during puberty and say super unhelpful things like get over it, or this will pass, or you're just going through a phase, or anything like that, that for someone in the throes of puberty and going through all the mood swings and emotional upheavals can sound extremely dismissive and like they don't care.